The First Crusade, 1096 to 1099. A story of faith, war, and destiny. A cry from the East long ago, near the end of the 11th century, there was trouble brewing in the East. The mighty Byzantine Empire, once the jewel of the old Roman world, was crumbling under pressure. Its emperor, Alexios I, Komnenos, looked out from his palace in Constantinople with worry. New enemies were closing in. These enemies were the Seljuk Turks, fierce Muslim warriors who had swept across the Middle East. They had conquered vast lands, Syria, Persia, and Asia Minor. In 1071, they had dealt the Byzantines a terrible blow at the Battle of Manzikert, seizing much of what is now modern-day Turkey. Now they were getting dangerously close to Constantinople, and they had also taken Jerusalem, the holy city. To Christians, Jerusalem was more than a city. It was the place where Jesus lived, died, and rose again. Every year, Christian pilgrims journeyed there to pray. But now, under the Seljuk Turks, reports spread that the roads were dangerous, pilgrims were being attacked, and holy places defiled. Whether these reports were entirely true or exaggerated, they caused great alarm in the Christian world. So Emperor Alexios did something bold. He asked the West for help. The Pope's thunderous call. In faraway France, in a town called Clermont, Pope Urban II stood before a massive crowd in November 1095. His voice rang like thunder as he cried out, "Your brothers in the East are suffering. The city of Jerusalem is in the hands of the infidel. Will you let it remain so?" He promised something powerful: forgiveness of sins to anyone who would take up the cross and fight. To the people of that time, this was like a guaranteed ticket to heaven. Knights saw a chance for glory and salvation. Peasants saw a chance for purpose, maybe even riches. And so, the word spread like wildfire. From castles to farms, from cities to monasteries, thousands cried out, "Deus vult, God wills it." The People's Crusade, a tragic prelude. Before the proper armies were even organized, a wave of ordinary people, led by a passionate preacher named Peter the Hermit, began marching east. They were mostly poor men and women with no training, no supplies, just blind faith. Along the way, some of these groups committed terrible acts, attacking Jewish communities in Germany and France, murdering innocent people. It was a dark stain on what was supposed to be a holy cause. And when they finally reached Muslim territory, they were slaughtered by the Turks. Few ever made it past Asia Minor. The princes gather. The real armies, the so-called Princes' Crusade, began their march in 1096. These were no ragtag groups. These were trained knights, seasoned warriors, and noble lords. Among them were Godfrey of Bouillon, a devout and courageous noble from Lorraine; Bohemond of Taranto, a bold Norman from southern Italy; Raymond of Toulouse, wealthy and deeply religious; Robert of Normandy, son of William the Conqueror; Tancred, Bohemond's fiery nephew. Each had his own motives, some for faith, others for land, others for honor. They arrived one by one in Constantinople, where Emperor Alexios welcomed them carefully. He asked them to swear they would return any lands they took back to him. Some agreed. Others crossed their fingers behind their backs. The Siege of Nicaea. Their first test came at Nicaea, a fortified city held by the Seljuk Turks. The Crusaders surrounded the city in May 1097. The Turks fought back fiercely, but the Crusaders dug in, building siege engines and launching projectiles over the walls. For weeks, they pressed in. But then something strange happened. Without telling the Crusaders, Emperor Alexios negotiated a secret surrender with the Turks. His forces snuck in by boat and raised the Byzantine flag. The Crusaders had fought and bled, but the prize was taken from them. They were furious, but they kept marching. The Battle of Dorylaeum, death in the heat. Soon after, in July 1097, as the Crusaders moved through the blistering plains of Asia Minor, disaster struck. At a place called Dorylaeum, the army led by Bohemond was ambushed by Seljuk cavalry. The Turks used hit-and-run tactics, surrounding the Crusaders with clouds of arrows. Men screamed, horses fell, panic spread. Bohemond formed a tight defensive circle. They held the line, but just when things seemed hopeless, reinforcements arrived. Godfrey, Raymond, and others burst onto the field, scattering the Turks in a roaring charge. And the Crusaders had survived, but barely. They learned the hard way how dangerous this journey would be, marching through hell. From there, the journey became a nightmare. The sun beat down mercilessly, water was scarce. Men collapsed from heat and thirst. At one point, the Crusaders were forced to drink the blood of their horses to survive. But still, they pushed on. Each step was closer to Jerusalem. The Siege of Antioch, a city of miracles and betrayal. By October 1097, they reached Antioch, one of the greatest cities in the East. Massive walls, strong garrisons. It was like trying to take a mountain. The siege lasted nearly 8 months. Food ran out. Men ate leather, weeds, even rats. Desertion became common. But then came a twist. A Muslim commander inside the city, Firuz, who had grown resentful of his leaders, betrayed Antioch. He opened a secret gate at night. Bohemond and a few brave knights climbed the walls, killed the guards, and opened the main gates. The Crusaders rushed in, and Antioch fell. But the very next day, a massive Muslim relief army, led by Kerboga of Mosul, arrived. Now the Crusaders were trapped inside the very city they had just taken. Morale plummeted. Starvation loomed again. Then came what many believed was a miracle. A soldier named Peter Bartholomew claimed that a vision of St. Andrew showed him where to find the Holy Lance, the spear that pierced Christ on the cross. They dug in a church and found a spearhead. Many believed it was a divine sign. With renewed hope, they charged out. It was the Crusaders' greatest victory so far. The final march to Jerusalem. After a long rest, the Crusaders pushed south. Along the way, they passed ruined cities, dusty plains, and abandoned forts. They were fewer now. Hunger, disease, and battle had thinned their numbers, but they were determined. In June 1099, they finally saw it. Jerusalem, the holy city. But it was not a welcoming sight. Strong walls, deep ditches, armed defenders. The city was under the Fatimid Caliphate, and the defenders were ready. The Crusaders had no siege towers, no supplies, so they built everything from scratch, cutting down trees, shaping wood, creating towers and rams. They fasted, they prayed, they marched barefoot around the walls, just like the Israelites around Jericho. Then, on July 15th, 1099, they attacked. Godfrey's men broke through the walls first. Fighting was brutal. One by one, the gates fell. The Crusaders poured in. Jerusalem falls, a day of triumph and tragedy. What followed was horrific. The Crusaders believed they were doing God's will. They killed thousands, Muslims, Jews, even some Christians caught in the chaos. Blood reportedly ran through the streets. It was a massacre. But to the Crusaders, it was a divine victory. They went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, knelt, and wept with joy. Godfrey of Bouillon was made defender of the Holy Sepulchre. he refused to be called king, saying he wouldn't wear a crown in the city where Jesus wore thorns. The aftermath. The Crusaders established the Kingdom of Jerusalem, along with other Crusader states like Edessa and Antioch. But they were surrounded by enemies. Muslims across the region were shocked, outraged, and began plotting to take the land back. Indeed, Antioch was attacked again in later years, and Jerusalem would fall to Muslim leader Saladin less than a century later. The Crusades were far from over. Final thoughts. The First Crusade remembered. The First Crusade was a strange mix of faith and fury, hope and horror. To some, it was a miracle, a ragtag army taking the most sacred city on earth. To others, it was a nightmare, a wave of blood and destruction. But no one could deny its impact. It set the stage for 2 centuries of war between East and West, between Christian and Muslim, over a patch of land that meant everything to both. And it all began with a speech, a cross, and the cry of Deus vult,